There's a small crowd this week. Yeah, it will. We will have more people show up. Shall we pray and get started with the study? Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the Sabbath school lesson and for the blessing it has been. For the reminder that following you even means being responsible in our finances. Help us to, well, first, please forgive us for our sins, and please help us to learn what you would have us learn. Please give us the Holy Spirit. Please may you alone be glorified. In your name, amen. So this week is laying up treasure in heaven. It's a little more on the spiritual side than the past couple weeks have been. Those have been more practical up to this point, and then this lesson focuses on the heart. So laying up treasure in heaven, the memory text is, "For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul?" So, somebody tell me what that means in your mind, in your perspective. How would we apply that to American culture?
I think that the first verse that comes to my mind, and I can't say where it's at, but it's where Jesus is talking to the ruler, and then he, at the end of it, he says, talks about you can only serve one master, not two. And so one of the words there is mammon.
Yep, mammon.
Which is actually finance. In our world, it's pretty important making enough money, not only to live, but to be able to buy all the extra.
Yeah.
So when you do that, that's a distraction.
Yeah. Because when we see the American dream, the term the American dream, you've all heard that for decades, which is typically own your own house, land, that kind of thing. But often the American dream is synonymous with keeping up with the Joneses. I got to get, this person just got the newest iPhone 14, so I have to get it. This person just got a brand new car, so I have to get a brand new car. But how does that fit in with the lesson? You know, what profit, what benefit will you get? None. So what do we do? Well, in the lesson on Sabbath, it says, Jesus says, do not lay up for yourselves treasure on earth. Why? Moth and rust, right. I like to think my house is safe. We live in a fairly quiet neighborhood. I have ways of protecting my family. But that's not a guarantee. So, Jesus, his investment strategy. Yes, Gary.
What you put your money into and what you put your effort into is your priority.
That's it.
And if you're putting your priority into accumulating things, that's going to monopolize it.
Yeah.
If you're putting your priority into moving God's work forward, that's going to be the thing that you're going to be motivated by and that you're going to be interested in.
I'm sure we've all heard the phrase, put your money where your mouth is. And that kind of concept.
I think that it's easy for us, this is Christian I'm talking about, for us to get tied up in things. And it seems, I have a hard time distinguishing between giving all or none. You know, and where does that line come?
Yeah.
You know? And even in the Bible, it kind of teaches extremes.
Yeah.
You know, people here extreme, and as I studied it, I tried to think of how is it that in today's society we can do this? Because I see all that they've done and what they gave up and stuff like that. And I know I haven't given up as much as they gave up.
Right.
So does that mean I'm lost? And so that's
it's your fruits, yeah.
That I'm looking for. And I have a reasonable thought on it, but still
Yeah. Gary?
There's call it a rule of thumb or principle or whatever. Whether you're dirt poor or got millions in the bank, where are your priorities?
Mm-hmm.
I knew a guy that was a doctor, and you'd look at his house and you'd think he was a millionaire.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, I built a house for my wife. And he had expensive horses, but he drove a beat up old truck and so forth. And his priority was moving forward the work of God
Mm-hmm.
with his finances, particularly. And when you take that attitude that my first priority is supporting the work of God, then you and God can compete, see who's blessed the most.
Mm-hmm. You know,
He's blessing the church over and over again, and God is blessing him, and he's blessing the church more, and God is blessing him more. And whether you're minimum wage or millionaire, those are your priorities. God's going to bless you.
mm-hmm.
I'm going to do as much as I can with what I have, whether I make $10 an hour or $50 an hour.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do for God whatever I can, the maximum amount I can. And when we take that position, then God blesses us.
And for God, it's not it doesn't matter nearly as much how much you make. He doesn't really care about that. He cares whether your heart is in it.
Yeah.
When I was scrolling on TikTok recently, I came across this church pastor's page, and he was talking about how they had somebody break in and steal some things, including their bacon. It was a Sunday church. But he seems like a legit guy. And somebody had given them some money, the church, and so they had somebody in the community who had cancer or something like that, and so they said, here's $500 for your costs. And then the mail, they got a check for $500. And somebody we knew at another church, she had a similar testimony. They were raising money for something, so she wrote a check for $1,000, gave it to the church. A little bit later in the mail, she got a check for $1,000. You know, it's when we follow the investment strategy that Jesus gives us, God will bless us in return. And it's not always financial, but he always will bless us. And it says, Jesus says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. That's pretty much what I think Gary was trying to say. And it says, the lesson says, show me what you spend your money on, and I will show you where your heart is. And that can be kind of scary for some people. Because if you come to church and you claim to be a Sabbath keeper, but your bank statements show you going to the club on Friday night, or going to IHOP after church on Sabbath. And but that's true. Eggs are $5-10 a dozen for the cheap eggs. That's pretty crazy. So if we put our money in God's work, there will be eternal rewards. American culture, I shouldn't just say American culture, I should say more like the first world culture, because it's not just here, it's any prosperous country. We have the same problem where people seek money. And we even see this prophesied about in Ellen White's writings, where she says, in these last days, a few men will try and get all the money there is to be gotten. And we see exactly that happening. But on this week's lesson, we're not going to focus so much on that. We're going to focus on a few stories from the Bible of different biblical figures and how they showed where their treasure was. So on Sunday's lesson, we're going to talk about Noah. Noah found grace. Noah is probably, I would probably say, my favorite example from this week's lesson. So let's read Genesis chapter 6, verses 5 to 14. Whoever gets it, go ahead, feel free to read it.
And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and the beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it repented me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations. And Noah walked with God. And Noah begat 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all the flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make me an ark of gopher wood. Rooms shalt thou make in the ark, and shalt pitch it within and without.
Read verse 8 again.
But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord.
That's the whole key of the whole story, I think. Noah found grace. Of the, they've done estimates, and some people have estimated the population of the earth before the flood to be in the billions. Similar to now, but even more. Like one estimate up to 10 billion people, pre-flood population. We don't know whether that's true or not. We have no way to test it. But that's an estimate. And of the possibly billions of people pre-flood, God found one family. One. Now, of course, the Spirit of Prophecy says there were other people who believed, but they died before the flood came. Methuselah died the year of the flood, He was one, but what was it that God called Noah to do? And yet we know he called him to build the ark, but let's dig deeper, okay? We're talking about hard issues this morning and how it relates to our finances. What did God call Noah to do beyond the ark? What was the deeper level?
Well, I think we find it in verse 9,
Mm-hmm.
where it says that Noah was a just man and perfect in his generation. And Noah
walked with, that's the key, he walked with God. That word walked means to live your life. And then James was, and then Gary.
I see that Noah was compassionate. Because, we all know we spent 120 years preaching.
Mm-hmm.
Repent and turn away from the wickedness that you're into. But yet he invited people into the ark
Mm-hmm.
and to salvation. And that's similar to us inviting people to accept Christ.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
For salvation.
Yeah. Gary?
I was thinking that the Bible doesn't really mention anything about Noah preaching to the people,
Mm-hmm.
but Spirit of Prophecy does.
Yeah.
And I can picture some of them looking at him thoughtfully and thinking this thing through, and some of them going, all that changed when the rain started coming down.
Yeah. Yeah. If you think about that for a second, because they were 120 years, Noah was preaching to the people. Come into the ark. Believe. Be saved. The world is going to be destroyed, right? That's our message. And then he was made fun of, mocked day after day. There were people who believed, but they died. There were people who believed, but because of the ridicule, they went so far off in the other direction that they ridiculed Noah also. And then they enter the ark. And nothing happened right away. It was a test of faith. Is Noah going to continue to trust God even when there's no rain? He's in the ark. Is he going to continue to trust God? Because we know from the story of the Israelites, you can see all the miracles you want to, and if the trial's hard enough, you very well may forget God anyway and complain anyway, even though you just saw a miracle right here. You're complaining right here.
One of the things that amazes me about the children of Israel, the Red Sea opened,
Uh-huh.
the manna fell, the Egyptians were defeated, several other enemies were defeated. All of these things happened, and they seem to me that they come down with a short memory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Yeah, but how often are we that way? You know, daily. And think about those people that were watching Noah, and then he went into the ark, and they were there for 7 days, and they continued making fun of him, and then maybe they were like, well, you know what? When Noah comes out of the ark, maybe we'll be nice to him because clearly he's insane. Nothing's gonna happen. And then on the 8th day, oh no, Noah was right. Imagine the fear in their hearts. It's our job to take this message to the world so they don't have to experience that fear.
That's what Noah was called to do.
Right.
Give a judgment. Yes,
A judgment message, exactly.
it is raining.
The hour of God's judgment had come. And one of the things I'm kind of disappointed the lesson didn't put this quote in here. But Patriarchs and Prophets, page 95, says that Noah invested everything he had into the ark. Everything. You think about it, before the flood, the world didn't look like it does now. You didn't have to mine for precious metals. You could go to the field and there was on the surface of the ground. You could go to the trees and cut them down and they would last for centuries because the trees were not much softer than stone. Noah could have built himself a mansion, but he invested everything into the ark, even though he saw zero evidence that it wasn't going to happen.
Noah was a man of foresight.
He was.
He knew that all that he had would be no good when the flood came.
And that's what the Spirit of Prophecy tells us. There will come a time when all the extra property we have will be useless. And it will fall into the wrong hands if we're just hoarding it. But the verse you brought up earlier in Genesis 6, verse 9, Noah walked with God. That's how he knew it was going to happen. He saw zero evidence, but that's how he knew it was going to happen. How many times have you shared the truth about the Sunday law with somebody and they said, that could never happen in this country. We have religious freedom here. I've heard it.
I've thought that in the past, and lately I've come to think, no problem, it'll happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And we believe it will happen, and now we're starting to see evidence of how it will happen. But for the first several decades of our church's existence, we saw no evidence. A little bit in the late 1800s. But after that, it kind of went away again. But yeah. So the lesson talks about something also in Sunday's lesson called delayed gratification, which is what Noah was experiencing. How many times have you wanted to go to the store and you saw a shiny new computer, or you went to the dealership and you saw a shiny new truck and you wanted to buy it? Did you buy it, and how did it work out? Or did you not buy it because you knew you needed to wait or you wanted something better? That's one of the lessons that's difficult to teach a child, especially mine. I want to buy this, Daddy. No, you need to save your money. That's cheap. It's going to break in a week. We went to Target yesterday because when I get off work on Friday, sometimes we like to go to Target and just walk around. And she saw an umbrella, a cheap looking umbrella, and it was $16. I said, no, that's expensive. Number one, we have umbrella at home. Number two, that's going to tear in a week. That's just a bad investment. And so delayed gratification is a difficult lesson to learn, I think, at any age. Because what do we want as people in a prosperous nation? What is our natural tendency? To look prosperous, yeah? We want to get it now. The pastor I grew up with, he was the pastor at the church when I was a kid. He was also the teacher at the church school as well. He baptized my brother and sister and I, and he said this world today is a microwave generation. You think about it. Now, instead of taking 15 minutes to boil a pot of pasta on the stove, you can put it in the microwave and make it in like 5 minutes. It's a microwave generation. We want it now. But what has God called us to do? Be patient. There's a popular, very false teacher by the name of Joel Osteen. And he says, you should be living your best life now. Microwave generation. God says, no, if you live your best life now, you're not going to heaven.
And you can see how people believe that outside of the street.
Because they want it now. People have gone in there, I don't think this is a very good idea, but they have gone in there trying to rebuke the doctrine, and they've been kicked out for it. And it's crazy. So the lesson points out what matters is that, like Noah, we do what God asks us to do in the meantime. Even if, as with Noah, it means some radical life changes. So it brings out a question that I think is good to answer. How ready would you be to make a major life change if God asked you to do similar to Noah did? How many of us would be ready? What if God called you to move to Africa? Tomorrow. Or shoot, right after church.
That's the wrong way.
Because when God came to Elijah, how long did he tell him to wait before going to talk to King Ahab? No, go now, right? Yeah.
I think that if we'll understand prophecy, God is going to ask every one of us to do exactly that.
I believe it, 100%.
Because circumstances are, if we're not willing now, the circumstances are going to force us to do it. Or we're going to choose the wrong way.
I think it's Jeremiah 15. It says, if you can't run with the footmen, what makes you think you can run with the horses? We need to prepare now. Gary?
I had a professor in college. He told us that he applied for mission service and he didn't hear anything. He didn't hear anything after I graduated from college. And he was the very first married seminary student.
Mm-hmm.
And the only place they could find to live was an attic room in somebody's house.
Interesting.
They moved
Yeah.
in. He went to school one day, came home that day, got a phone call, said, we want to send you to India. So he dropped out of college, out of seminary, packed up what little bit he had, and went to India for 18 years.
Wow.
By the way, he said, I never want to see or eat, touch or eat rice again.
That's funny.
After eating rice for 18 years.
Yeah.
That takes, shall I say, confidence in God that he's leading.
Yeah.
To leave everything behind and move off somewhere. And this was 1946, 1948, something
Okay.
like that he left.
So God doesn't call all of us to make that kind of sacrifice, but he calls all of us to make a full surrender of everything we have. And that is going to look different for each one of us. Do you have something, Scott?
I feel like, he did that with us.
Mm-hmm.
When he had us home for Sabbath,
Yeah.
I ended up quitting a job that I had to go to, rather than stay home and then do.
Yeah.
And he had to move us to it too.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking the first while how hard that was, because my whole identity was in it,
Yeah.
and then I lost it. But I didn't lose it.
You gave it up.
But yeah, and so I wonder how Noah had felt when God called him to build the ark. He had just completely changed.
Change his life's direction.
I wonder how that affected him.
Yeah. For sure. And it's not just Noah. Let's go to Monday's lesson and talk about Abraham. Abraham had not a similar experience necessary, but same in principle. And before he was Abraham, of course, he was Abram. So think about Abram. This was the man that God chose where the Messiah would descend from. Right? He was a Semite. He was a descendant of Shem, hence the term Semite. So that's why Jews and Arabs and people like that are known as Semites, because they're all descendants of Shem. Now, what was he called to do? Let's look at Genesis chapter 12, and somebody read verses 1 to 3.
The Lord had said to Abram, go from your country and your people, your father's household, to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all people on earth will be blessed through you.
So the first thing that God says to Abram, the first thing we have record of God saying to him, get up, Abraham, get out. Time to go for a walk. Did you have something else here? No? Okay.
I want to say something because this didn't just miraculously happen.
Right, of course. Right.
Because Abraham was a good man, and he apparently was very well thought of among his family, among his herdsmen, and because we know the story after he did leave, everybody followed him.
Yeah.
Why did anybody have any confidence in a man who popped up one morning and say, I had a dream, I got to leave this place? But people knew him and trusted him, and he had a working relationship with the community he lived in. And they were nomadic people, we know that.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note that even though this is the first thing we have record of God saying to Abraham, this wasn't the first experience they had together. Abraham and God had been walking together for several decades by this point. Abram. By the time this command came, he was probably, around 75, I think. For him, that was middle-aged. He lived to be, I think, over 200 years. Right? I think. And so, God calls him, get up, leave your country, leave everything you know, and go that way.
Leave your family.
Leave your family.
And he didn't leave all his family. And so when we read the story of Abraham until his father died, and then Lot went away, and then after that was when God gave him a son.
So this,
not before, because he didn't leave all his family.
Because if Abraham would have raised Isaac in Ur, what would have happened to Isaac? Exactly, he would have become a pagan, most likely. And it's interesting that you brought that up. I think that's an excellent point, because it was a process of Abraham leaving Ur and getting to his destination. Because how many stops did he make along the way? He left Ur, he stopped in Haran, something like that. I don't know how to pronounce it. And that was where his father died, I believe it was. So they camped there until his father died. Then they went on further, and they stopped in Philistine country. They stopped in Egypt. They went back to Canaan. He was kind of all over the place. And it's interesting, the lesson points out that these folks, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, none of them experienced possession of the land of Canaan. They lived there, but it wasn't theirs.
One of the things that last night I was listening to Conrad Ryan, he was talking about the mindset of the people in the East. And they put a lot of dreams and visions. And so it was not, to us, it was amazing that Abraham did this, but it would not be unusual for that society to do something like that, because they had God came to them in a dream.
Yeah.
But what he did was, no doubt, amazing. God had a special place.
Yeah. And so he had other members of the family follow him, like Lot and others. And in fact, that's the next day's lesson, which we'll get to in a little bit. But it says in Hebrews 11, by faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place which he would receive as an inheritance, and he went out not knowing where he was going. Imagine the modern day equivalent would essentially be James, get in your truck and drive. That's it. That's all God tells you. Get in your truck and drive. What would be your reaction if God told you that? Gary, get in your truck and drive. That's it.
Who's going to pay for the gas?
Yeah. Who's going to pay for the gas, especially in this economy? Get in your truck and drive.
These days, if you got all the way to New Mexico and God hadn't said anything yet,
Yeah.
then you'd be wondering about it.
Mm-hmm.
But
I like New Mexico.
God always, he did. He let Abram. He didn't just tell him to leave. He
Mhm.
saved him.
Right. And that's the important thing.
Communicated with God every single day.
But God only told him what he needed to know as the process went on. Cassandra?
There is one person in our society and in our church in particular, pastors.
Yeah.
God tells them to go somewhere like our pastor going to Frederick.
Yeah. About 6 hours away from here.
Yeah. Maybe he's never heard of the town. And he's just gonna go anyway. Because God told him to.
Pastors get a call and get up and go here. Even, and it's not just pastors too, nurses and everybody. Pastors are a very clear example, yes. I remember in 2013, Savannah was 3, and my wife had gotten sick of public school and was applying to Adventist schools. And then God called us to Denver for a year. And I loved Denver because mountains. I love the mountains. Mountains and lakes are my favorite form of geography. But then God called us to Illinois for 4 years, and I hated Illinois with a passion. It's flat. It's mostly ugly. And I call it the California of the Midwest. I hated it. But God called us there for a reason. And shortly before we left to move back here, somebody came to us and says, "Hey, I'm following the health message, and now it's because of you." And I'm sure she wasn't the only one God called us there for. But God called us there for a reason. We're not always going to enjoy where we go. But Abraham brings us an interesting example, and I think his story is an example of sanctification for us today, because what did he do when he got to Philistine country? What did he tell his wife? Say that you're my sister. Was it true?
Yes.
Half. It was half true, which is a whole lie.
Yeah.
But what did he do when he got to Egypt? What did he tell Sarah to tell the Pharaoh? You're my sister. Abraham, as close as he was with God, I can't do that very easily anymore. It was like that, right? Like that with God. And he still lied twice, and Isaac did too. Cassandra?
We're reading a devotional book, and during this past week, one of the devotions was, why did the apostles get all frightened and scared in the big storm on the lake?
Yeah.
They should have trusted Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
But we do that all the time.
All the time.
When something's big and scary happens, like Katrina,
Yeah.
we place ourselves in the hands of God. I think we try to do something. We try to fix it ourselves, like they did.
Mm-hmm. I tell you, recently, when I emailed my resume to the conference, and from the time that I heard that email back until the time that I got a phone call back was about a week. And I had a daily battle with anxiety. Are they going to call? What are they going to say? It's just like, and Abraham had that too. And so,
Good about Abraham is that even though those things, he did those things, God still blessed him because he still trusted God.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
He give up his faith. And that's the question. Well, it depends how far you think. Should he have trusted in government or should this is my wife? I don't know. But we know that God still blessed him and the Savior still came through him.
Mm-hmm.
And God fulfilled his promises.
Oh yeah. And it's the trials of, he didn't give up, and that's the important thing. And at the end of his, well, near the end of his life, he got one of the hardest trials that he had ever gotten. God says, come, take your son. I've finally given you a son. This is your life's dream. Kill him. Sacrifice him. Gary?
One of the most interesting things to me about that story is that even as he's going up the mountain, knowing what he's been told to do, his confidence is that he will come down the mountain with his son. And it seems incongruous given what he was told to do, that he would come back down the mountain with his son. But his trust in God, I wish mine was that implicit.
Yeah. But that's what trials lead us to, is to lead us to be able to recognize God's voice. Abraham knew human sacrifice was wrong. He knew all that. But he knew God's voice. I don't understand this, but I know it's your voice. So I'm going to make the journey. Maybe, yeah. Sarah?
I think it connects that him going to sacrifice with the vision that God gave him well before he even had his son, and where he showed him what was going to happen, what was going to happen. And I think God calling him to take Isaac up there kind of solidified the idea that Jesus was going to send
Yes,
his son.
absolutely.
And it made that vision real for him.
And that was probably the lesson that he had. You know, Abraham understood the heart of God so much more after that. You know, essentially what Jesus was telling Abraham was, I'm going to do that for you one day. Which is why Jesus told the Pharisees, Abraham saw my day and he was glad. In Hebrews 11, I just want to kind of summarize this scripture that they're bringing out so we can go to the next day's lesson. But it talks about, it says, in Hebrews 11, verse 8, by faith Abraham, he was called to leave his nation, to receive an inheritance, and he went out. Didn't know where he was going. He went to the land of promise. He was dwelling in the same areas as Isaac and Jacob and the others. And it says he looked for a city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is who? Is God. That city's not on earth. Not yet. It says through faith Sarah was strengthened. At 90 years old, she gave birth. And it goes on, and it says, these all died in faith, not having received the promises. If any of us die before, then we die without receiving the promise. But will we get the promise? If we're faithful, yes. So let's talk about then the opposite example. We saw a couple of examples of what we should do, minus a few mistakes. In Tuesday's lesson, we see the example of what we should not do. We see the story of Lot.
To move our tents.
Yeah.
To move our tents to the sea.
So, why did they split up? Abram and Lot, why did they split? Their shepherdsmen were fighting.
But they were
So blessed because they had so much.
Yeah.
That's when it became a problem.
And back then, we have to understand also that wealth was measured in livestock. It's not like now where you can both be millionaires and you sit in the same pew and you're fine. We don't have I have more money than you, leave, you know. They had livestock. They needed to be separate. Did you have?
Yeah, I just want to say that they were blessed, both of them, to have more than they could be together. That's why they had to split. But Lot was blessed because of Abraham.
Yeah,
not
that's right.
Because of himself,
So
because he was connected to Abraham.
So Lot was Abram's nephew, so he would have been younger enough, probably younger enough to be able to be Abraham's son. So there was this not elder situation. Father figure, father-son kind of relationship. So you had this authority submission kind of thing. That's how it should have been. And then they started having these arguments and fights between Abraham's employees, essentially, and Lot's employees. And Abraham says, look, we can't do this anymore. It's like, I love you, but one of us has to move. And as the lesson points out, Lot should have deferred to Abraham.
Yeah.
No, why didn't he? What did he have his eyes on that he didn't defer to Abraham like he should have? The lush green valleys. Right. He wanted more.
Lot shows he had faith when he left with Abraham,
Mm-hmm.
but his faith was in Abraham instead of God.
Right.
Abraham's faith was in God. That's what got Lot in trouble. His faith was in him instead of God.
I think that we see an example of the two different kinds of end-time Christians. You know, you have the Abraham Christians who walk with God daily and consistently, and their reward is going to be incredible in heaven. And then you have the Lot-like Christians who more lukewarm, more nominal, and they may go to heaven, but because they didn't walk with God daily, their reward is not that much. You know, they're there, and that's the point. But we're supposed to take other people with us, as many as we can, right? And Lot had his eyes on making more money. And so the Bible says that in Genesis 13, says they separated themselves from each other. Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain. And it says that he pitched his tent toward Sodom. That was his first mistake, right?
And the next thing you know, he's living there.
And the next thing you know, he's living in Sodom. So it was a progression. Just as Abraham had this, he made mistakes along the way, but he was growing closer to God. Lot made mistakes along the way, and he was growing further away from God. He knew the truth. He knew the doctrines, right? He was that Adventist who would come to church, but then go home and watch football, maybe. And so, yeah.
Second Peter says Lot was righteous.
Yeah. And I think the spirit of prophecy does say that he was saved. But then at what cost? You know, if I come to church and I teach and I preach, but I go home and do what Lot did, I'm not in a good situation. Especially as an elder, as a leader, as somebody in a position of influence in the church. If I go home and do other things, I'm not in a good situation. Like, I have an accountability, right? Sandra, and then my wife.
I went to school with a man I'm still in touch with today, and he was studying to be a pastor, not an Adventist, but he was studying to be a pastor. And I invited him to a Bible study one night, and he said he didn't really want to come because he didn't think he didn't believe in Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
and he's studying to be a pastor.
That's interesting.
How could that be? I don't understand. He never actually became a pastor.
There are churches like that, though. They become pastors for the paycheck.
Yeah.
I've read about them, you know. And I'm not necessarily talking about, like, lukewarm pastors or Laodicean pastor. There are congregations I've read about where the pastors just have a paycheck. That's really all it is. Well, I think that's a different situation, but yeah. And yes, I forgot about my wife. Sorry.
That could be a bad thing.
That could be.
I was thinking, saying that, if Lot was righteous, he was saved, and you were saying at what cost? The cost of his family.
Yeah,
He lost his family.
almost all of them.
Yeah.
And that's and we'll get to that in a minute too. But when Sodom and Gomorrah and those 5 cities, they were wild, they were raucous, they were licentious, and every bad adjective you can think of. But they were under tributary to other kings. And they decided, we're not going to do it anymore. Those other kings came in, said, yes, you are. And they took a lot of them captive, including Lot. And when Abram heard of it, what did he do? Did he say, you got yourself in this situation, figure your own way out? He went and got him. What if Steve decides he doesn't want to be Adventist anymore? We need to go get him. If he goes home and drinks a fifth of whiskey every night, what do? We go get him. Gary?
I was thinking about Abraham the other day. His rescue of Lot. 369 men or 363 men from his household. So I thought, well, wait a minute. Most of those guys were between 20 and 40.
Yeah.
Most of them were married. Probably they had children.
Mm-hmm.
And then you take the ones that were over 40 who were married and had children and maybe grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
And they all lived there with Abraham. You know, he was a major force of people.
His household was around 1,000 at least.
And you don't ignore a guy like that.
Yeah. And I think that the Patriarchs and Prophets says they were trained to fight. And so what's interesting about this story, though, is if God wasn't with Abraham, there's no way that 360 some odd men would have been able to fight 5 kings off. It just wouldn't work. Huh?
Abraham saw that.
And Abraham saw that, and he went with God in God's strength, and they whipped the tail off of those kings. To the point where they brought everybody back. They brought spoil back. And notice where Abraham's heart was. Keep all that treasure. I don't need it. How many of us, when faced with a $10 million check because we did something special, how many of you would turn it down? Mm-hmm. But it would be a temptation to say, no, I don't want it. I would be very tempted to say, I'll take that. Because I'm poor. But yeah, exactly. And then some. But Lot he goes into the city, and he's making money. He's still making money. He's increasing in wealth. He's thinking, man, this is great. I got money. I got food. There's pretty women to look at. There's stuff to do. And then, what message did Abraham get? What did God tell Abraham in Genesis 18? He came to investigate, and that's the investigative judgment right there. Yeah. And so Abraham starts interceding. As we know, the story goes, there wasn't enough people for God to save the city. And here's the cost that my wife mentioned a few minutes ago, is that the angels came to Lot. They say, Lot, God has decided this city and the other all 5 cities. But he said, God's going to destroy this place. Get your family, get out. And Lot goes to his 2 daughters that were married. He had at least 4 daughters. We know this because 2 were married. The Bible says that, and 2 were not. So he goes to his 2 daughters that were married. He went to them, and he talks to them and their husbands, and who knows if they had kids or not. And they laughed at him. God's going to destroy this city. You guys need to get out. Please come with me. Let's get out. Let's escape. Let's save our family. Dad, you're nuts. What's that? They didn't believe. Why? Because Lot moved there in the first place. I did a sermon a while back, and I've done it here, but it's been a while. Lot, when he moved into, when he lollygagged around and didn't leave the city when he was told to, that's why his wife was destroyed. Now, she will be judged according to her own mistakes, absolutely. The Patriarchs and Prophets, and I can show you the quote later. She places the blame on Lot. She says specifically, if Lot would not have manifested hesitancy, and if he would have taken his family and left when he was told to, his wife would have survived.
That's the reason we have.
Yes.
We're good people. So something is up in my life. So I'm going to follow them. And if we make them lead them the wrong way, we are responsible.
And how many of us have made mistakes because we like that person, so we do what they do? All of us. Cassandra?
One of our churches in South Louisiana, there was a woman there who had 2 teenage daughters. And both of them went to Southwestern.
I did too.
And she said that she had had them in church school their whole lives, and she had made sure they went to an Adventist university. And then all of a sudden, the kids were home. And we asked her, why are the kids home? And she said, I have given everything for my children to go to church school. Their whole lives, I have not seen them because they had been in an academy or in university. And I thought it was time for them to come home. So she moved the kids home. They weren't through with college, so they went to a local college there in the town where we live. And guess what? They married little Baptist guys. Because there were no Adventists. You didn't know any Adventists.
Yeah.
Not that right.
So that's the power of influence.
Yeah.
And it can work the other way too.
Absolutely.
Baptists can go to an Adventist university and convert just as well.
Yeah.
But we need to be very careful about who we influence and who influences us.
And that was the issue that Lot faced as he moved into the city, and all of his family, all of them, were influenced to worldliness. 2 of his daughters were perished in the city. His wife became a pillar of salt. What happened to the other 2 daughters? What did they do? Afterwards, yeah. Incest. They slept with their fathers because they wanted to preserve his bloodline. That's not a good idea, folks. There's science about that. It's a bad idea. And
that means that they learned from
the city,
the
yes.
city because that was too much.
One of the cities that they were destroyed for was sexual licentiousness, and it wasn't just homosexuality. It was the incest and who knows what else, folks. Things that aren't worthy of mention. Cassandra?
And their children were not Israelites, they were Moabites.
The Moabites and the Ammonites. Israel would not have had the problem with that if Lot and his family would have lived the way they were supposed to. Those 2 nations would have never existed. And so we see some very, very, very important lessons here. God blessed Lot with wealth, yes? Yes, he did. But he lost it, all of it. All of it. And he became such a pathetic example of what not to do. Sweetheart?
Didn't Lot even whine and complain?
Yes.
The angel told him where to go.
Uh-huh.
He basically begged and said, send me here instead. If he would have gone where the angels told him to go, do you think that would have even happened with his daughter?
I don't think so. It was his hesitancy. You know, imagine if you lived in Dallas, God says go here, out into the middle of nowhere. Lord, can't I just go to, what's a good example? Can I just go to Texarkana? It's a small city. Compared to Dallas, it's a small city. Dallas is in the millions. Texarkana is not. Texarkana is still under 100,000, I think. But God says, no, go here. And we see the example of in our own church in the Linden area, there are people who have bought land and are moving to Linden. They're leaving Dallas. And I've met a couple of them. And they're moving to out in the middle of nowhere in Linden. Literally. We met one of them a few weeks ago, a month or 2 ago. His name is Eric Vineyard. I think they've transferred their membership to Linden already. They still live in Rockwall. Their house is not done yet. But he took us to their property, and man, I tell you, it is beautiful. Quiet. You could not hear anything but silence. Sanda.
One of the nice things about it is they're using entirely Adventist labor. In that they could find it. They have an Adventist contractor who goes to Texarkana. They've got Adventist sewage digger.
Oh yeah.
Septic
Yes.
line.
Yes. Right.
It's just amazing. They're doing it. They're trying to do it the right way.
Yes, and that's the key. That's why they're so prosperous. That's why it's working out for them. Those who have moved out here anyway, not all of them, and not very many of them have actually. But those who have, it's working. It's working out. 5 families. That's why it's so they're doing so well, and because they're doing it God's way. So we had Abram. His heart was with God. He made mistakes, but his heart was with God. We had Noah, same thing. Although the Bible said Noah's mistakes were after the flood when it records those. Then we have Lot, exact opposite. He was the Christian who says, no, it's okay to live in the city. It's okay to do this. It's okay not to follow this doctrine strictly. And then he failed miserably. Now, in Wednesday's lesson, we're talking about Moses, I think. No, Jacob. Moses is in this lesson. It's Thursday, though. But Jacob is an interesting story. He was kind of a combination, I think. He had the sort of the faith of Abraham, but he wasn't solidified. So he kind of had a little bit of Abraham and Lot. He was related to both of them. He didn't want to wait. That was the key. What did God call him to do? What was his calling?
Actually, he was the lineage for Jesus.
The lineage for Jesus. He was the ancestor of the nation of Israel, right? That's it. Israel was named after him. And he knew God was calling him to big things. God even told Isaac and Rebekah before they were born, while she was still pregnant with Esau and Jacob, the older will serve the younger. And so, yes.
Is that not the birthright?
Uh-huh.
Birthright was not only wealth, but it was the extension of God's family through the generations.
Yeah. And so, but even with twins, whoever was born first was the firstborn, and were treated as such. Isaac's favorite son was Esau, the manly man, the hunter. Rebekah's favorite son was Jacob. He was the softy. He was the academic, you could say. He stayed home. He was smooth-skinned. Esau was rough-skinned. Lots of very hairy. And so you have this story of Jacob knew what he was called to do, and Moses too. Moses knew what he was called to do. So we can kind of combine these two stories. Moses and Jacob knew what they were called to do, and what did they do? They both made the same mistake in principle. They wanted to help. They said, God, let me help. Abraham did it too. Right? Hagar. It's interesting that if Abraham would not have taken Hagar to wife, the world would look very different today. But Jacob and Rebekah, and it's interesting, Jacob was hesitant about it too, though. Like Rebekah said, hey, Esau's off going on a hunting trip. Let's deceive your father. He said, no, Mom, I don't think this is a good idea. Nonsense, let's do it. And so she got him into it, and they did it. And as the lesson says, he had to flee because Esau was super angry. And he never saw his mother again. He was gone for 20 years. He never saw his mother again. And Moses was a similar issue. Moses was called to do what? What did God call him to do? To lead Israel out of Egypt, and he knew that, right? But he wanted to do it with military might. So when he saw that Egyptian beating the Israelite, what did he do? He killed him. Yeah, he killed him.
He was trained in the military.
Yes, he was trained in military art. Moses had the best of the best. Yeah, that's a good point. Moses had the best training, the best education. He was specifically being groomed to take over Egypt as Pharaoh. That's what he was going to do. But because of his mother's influence, he wanted to be with Israel. He just went about it the wrong way. Sanda?
The one that became Pharaoh, wasn't that his stepbrother? I mean, it's like he would have.
It probably would have been, yeah.
Well, lineage was to go from her to the queen, which was Moses'
His stepmother, basically.
Moses was more impressive than that
Uh-huh.
than his stepmother, or half-brother, whatever he was. But the queen had chosen Moses
Yeah.
to be next to him.
Yeah. So Moses was going to be Pharaoh. But Jochebed raised him in the truth, and that never left him, even though he made that serious mistake. Jacob ran away, was gone for 20 years. Moses ran away, was gone for 40 years. Gary?
How many times have you made a mistake as far as God is concerned? And God says, okay, we'll turn this around and use it to your advantage.
Mm-hmm.
Use it to go my way. You know, we don't know what God's intention was for Moses if he had stayed in Egypt and been faithful. But we know that God had to get him out of that environment, get him out by himself, before God could use him as he wanted to use him.
It's what's interesting about all of these stories we're talking about, except for Lot, is that they all had a wilderness experience. Abraham was called to the wilderness. Jacob was called to the wilderness. Moses was called to the wilderness. And why? For the purpose of refining them.
So that they could not be distracted by all the things inside.
Yeah.
John the Baptist was the
Same thing, yes.
What I find interesting is that all of these men, their mothers, all knew what God's will was. They were walking in that will. They all decided to help God make it happen.
That's the truth. And some of us can have that. I'm sure some of us have had that experience. I know I have. I wanted to force my way into ministry. I got a teaching job for 2 years. Decided I hated being a teacher. And now I'm still waiting on God's promises again. I've learned my lesson. Don't let it happen if it's not your will, Lord. Because I won't be happy there. And Moses learned that lesson too. And what's interesting is that I think it's in the Signs of the Times, I'm not sure, but the Spirit of Prophecy says that he was apparently cut off from his life's mission. Moses, speaking of Moses. But he was receiving the very discipline necessary for its fulfillment. You may feel like, for whatever reason, you may feel like you can never achieve what you feel God has called you to do. But it may be that God is just refining you and preparing you for that time. Think about, I think we're pretty much running out of time. But one last point I want to make, and that is Moses. He was, again, he was in line to become the Pharaoh. He had the best education in school. He had the best military training. The only thing they couldn't get him to do was to accept their religion. But he was still in line to become Pharaoh. And at that time, Egypt was the world power. It was the superpower of that age. They were prosperous. They were mighty. They were strong. And Moses left all of that. Now, from a worldly perspective, how much sense does that make? None. Imagine, Chris, imagine if you're in line to receive the wealth of Apple Incorporated. We're talking $1 trillion company. How difficult would it be for you to say no? Anybody? How difficult would it be? It's the point of view.
If I'd have to believe the way they believe, then the answer would have to be no.
Right.
If I had our point of view.
And you got to imagine Moses was kind of comparing the Egyptian religion with the religion he was brought up with. I mean, the Egyptians had gods for everything. They had the god of the dead. They had the god of the living. They had a god of their socks, it seemed like. You know, they had gods for everything. Israel had one. One. Cassandra?
We have an example in Prince Harry.
Yeah?
Because he says, of course, he wasn't going to be king, but he was going to be wealthy.
Uh-huh.
You can be sure of that. But he gave all that up, and he says the reason is the safety of his family.
Yeah. And
he had a better choice than money.
there has to be a more motivating reason for that to happen. For him, safety, his family. Love for his family was essentially the reason. Moses, what made him choose God over Egypt? his faith, the love of his mother. In Hebrews 11, it talks about, again, how all of these, they died without receiving the promise, but they were looking forward to the promise. Moses chose to cast his lot in with a slave people. The one who was in line to be king chose to be a slave. Because he loved God more than anything else. He looked into the future, as much as a mortal can without being a prophet, you know. He looked into the future and he saw God's city. You can move to Dallas, you can move to Chicago, you can move to New York, you can move to Paris, London, any big city and make billions of dollars. Anybody can do it. It takes hard work, sure, but anybody could do it. But it takes a special power to be able to look at all of that and still say no. I choose Jesus. Because I know that I'm going to have an incredible eternity. I know that I'm going to have everything I want in heaven, everything I need, and I get to spend it with Jesus, the one who died for me, the one who loves me, the one who saved me from my sin. That's what Moses' thought was, and that should be the thought for each and every one of us. Because if we choose if we choose the world over heaven, we've made a grave mistake. Basti, did you have something?
Yes. We see in this story of Moses the importance of the mother in the education of the mother on the little ones. Because Moses was with his mother only 12 years, but his mother made a big impact in his mind.
Yeah.
The teaching of the truth. So he never forget and never get away from all these teachings. That's why he chose spend his life with the people of Israel instead of in the throne of Pharaoh.
And that's a good point. The Bible calls husbands and fathers to be the spiritual leaders, providers, and protectors of the home. But the Spirit of Prophecy also says that the work of the mother is the most important thing you could ever do. Angels could not ask for a higher mission. That's how important you women are. So one more quote, and then we got to close up because we're already over time. So Friday's lesson, the last quote, Patriarchs and Prophets, page 246. She says, the magnificent palace of Pharaoh and the monarch's throne were held out as an inducement to Moses. But he knew that the sinful pleasures that make men forget God were in its lordly courts. He looked beyond the gorgeous palace, beyond a monarch's crown, to the high honors that will be bestowed on the saints of the Most High in a kingdom untainted by sin. He saw by faith an imperishable crown that the King of Heaven would place on the brow of the overcomer. This faith led him to turn away from the lordly ones of the earth and join the humble, poor, despised nation that had chosen to obey God rather than to serve sin. Keep our eyes on Jesus. Keep your eyes on Jesus. Keep your eyes on the reward of the righteous. And as the hymn says, the things of earth will go dim, strangely dim. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the Sabbath school lesson and for the reminder to place our money where our mouth is, to lay up treasure in heaven where it cannot be touched. Lord, forgive us where we have failed you and where we have been like all of the mistakes mentioned here in the lesson. Help us to be like Abraham, like Isaac, like Jacob when they were overcomers, like Moses. Most of all, like Jesus. Be with us this service. Bless the sermon. Bless Gary as he brings forth your word. Give us your Holy Spirit in abundant measure. In your name, amen.